Thank you all for coming out tonight. Wow, this mic works well. I'm Van, and here's Kevin, and there's Ash. Ash is actually our first technology champion. He's going to be helping us in the Android area. And what that means is, well, number one, that's the technology you work with, and number two, you're willing to come out here on a monthly basis and help with the breakout sessions in that area. So if that's something that sounds interesting to you, like on a different technology, or if we don't have to have just one champion for any particular technology, then come talk to one of the three of us about that later. Just a few quick announcements. I don't think our breakout idea is working out quite that well yet. The idea was this board up here. If there's some topic on Google technology that you would like to see a breakout, you could come up and write it right up there. If you plan to stay for a breakout session on one of the existing topics, you come up and check it off so you can kind of see what the interest is each evening. So we don't have to spend a lot of time at the break to figure out what we're going to do. So I already know from the sign-ups that about 150 of the 200 people that signed up were interested in an Android breakout. So if you are going to be doing the Android breakout, just make sure you move into the front two-thirds of the seats, because it will probably become basically a deeper dive Q&A with Dick using the whole setup. If you're interested in open social or one of the other topics, we'll go to the back of the room, find your other interested parties. I'm a maps guy, so if there's people that want to talk about maps and Earth, more a maps guy than an Earth guy, but I do a little bit of both. So I'll be doing one on that in the back of the room somewhere. And I guess that's about it. Well, of course, thank Google for providing our meeting space and the food for tonight and making Dick available. And we haven't talked to Ash about this yet, but we're talking about having a lunch like the week after for the volunteers that help run this group. Basically, a postmortem of the meetings and like plans for next meeting. So we could definitely use more help running this group. So talk to one of us again, or email us. The email's on the site if you'd like to get together with us for lunch, like once a month, in the middle of the month, and maybe get involved in making these meetings happen. And then anything else here? Oh, I'll just remind people again, don't forget to turn your cell phone on when you leave, because you've already turned it off or put it on vibrate. And we are recording tonight, so we're going to have this mic, and when we get to Q&A, Dick can point out who he sees with the next question, and we'll run the mic to that person so that the questions can also get recorded. Does that make sense? And then hand things over to Dick. So I don't think Dick really needs an introduction, at least to people that are active in the Java development world. He's, the Java posse that he's a member of, the podcasts they do have a great following. He was one of the original Java champions, I believe, that actually gives feedback into Sun, and directions that they move with Java, and now he's a developer advocate at Google, and he's going to talk to us about Andrew tonight. So,
okay, thank you. Okay, good. Hello, everyone. That one as well. Okay, I guess we're covering all the bases now. Okay, so yeah, I'm Dick Wall. I'm a developer advocate on Android for Google right now. I am delighted to be giving a talk on Android. I don't do enough of these at the moment, so I'm always glad when I can get this out in front of people. Just to get a feel for who I'm talking to here, how many of you guys use Java or C#, some kind of Java-like language? Okay, that's good. That's encouraging. Anybody work on Java mobile and embedded software, J2ME, that kind of thing? How about enterprise stuff like Java EE? Okay. Now, perversely, the guys who have some kind of enterprise knowledge will probably find that they have more concepts that they'll be coming across tonight than some of the J2ME guys will. There's a lot of stuff that will come at you that looks very enterprisey, kind of services and web views of the world and that kind of thing. So, okay, so the Android development environment is quite a bit different from what you might have seen before. The engineers and the team here set out to provide a new kind of mobile and embedded development environment, very much trying to fix some of the problems of the past. I think a lot of people have found frustration in the fragmentation that's occurred in other platforms and stuff like that, but also more in the area of the completeness and the power that's available in modern devices. So for the time, I've actually used J2ME for quite a long time. I like it. It was a great technology and very, very suitable for the kind of devices that were around when it was created. Now, however, the phones are getting increasingly more powerful and smart, and we want that kind of power and feature richness to come through in a development environment that's still easy to use, and so that's why this was created. So some of the features of Android. First up, the user interface. This is based on, well, you can do it a number of ways. Any Swing developers in the audience will be delighted to know that there is a way that you can write your applications that looks kind of Swingish, very much a create the components and nest them inside one another and set the parameters. That's a disaster for me. I'm not really a very good UI person, and so I actually really like the UI declarative XML option there. You can define everything as an XML file, and that definitely works better for me personally. Okay, so the major components or the major architectural pieces of Android are these activities, intents and intent receivers, services, content providers, and then we're going to take a look at the application lifecycle at the end of this as well. We're going to take a look at all of these concepts tonight, and hopefully you'll come away with a kind of working understanding of what all these different parts are and how they fit together. We'll also take a quick look at the project structure and how that's set out when you actually create an Android application. Okay, if we get time, we'll have a look at the tools. The tooling is, at least the most complete environment that you have available to you is based on Eclipse right now. And there's a number of tools that are provided as part of the SDK and the plugin for Eclipse. The Eclipse plugin is actually pretty powerful now. It's got debugging, profiling, it's got some heap analysis stuff in it. You can do a lot with it to not just write applications, but make them better as well. Okay, so let's take a quick look at the GUI stuff first of all, give you a taster for how I write GUIs. You guys, if you're Swing experts or some kind of programmatic UI layout, you may want to skip this part, but this is certainly the way I do it. So GUI creation is quite different from Java Swing or Java ME if you've used either of those. The layout files go into a special directory in the project structure called, basically anything under the res directory, and we'll get into resources later, but anything under the res directory, there's a structure under there that compiles all of these things into resources. It's a little bit like a resource fork from the old Mac days, if you remember those or anything like that. So there's this whole structure. Anything that's put in there gets bundled up into the application and put across for use by your application on the device. So in this case, res layout, this is where your XML layout files go. Layouts can be nested inside one another, and we'll get to what the different kind of layout managers are. But the key there is that you can create some pretty sophisticated results just by putting one layout down and then nesting another one inside it, or several other ones inside it, and so on. The strings and internationalization stuff, in the same res directory, there's a strings.xml file under the values folder. You define strings in there that can be then internationalized or changed easily. There's a number of reasons that that's done. One of the main ones, though, is like everything else. So Android is really focused on running on small embedded devices with limited resources. And having the strings in a file like that means that it can be compressed down into a very efficient binary format and then transferred to the device, and then you're given addresses to access those resources. So it's a much more efficient way of keeping those kind of resources around. Okay, so creating a GUI, and I'll show an example of this later, but when you create a GUI in the XML file, you use let me get my cursor up here. This @ symbol basically means this is a reference to something that I've defined. The plus after it is not always there, but the plus, if it's there, means if you can't find this thing in a resource file already, go ahead and create it for me right now. So this is useful if you're declaring a new control and you want to give it a label right there and then, which is going to be used to handle it from the Java source code. And so that's kind of notation that you'll see popping up a lot in the user interface code. Resource building. So what happens with these different files under the res directory is Eclipse, or the Eclipse plugin, actually it's a program called AAPT, which the Eclipse plugin uses. It runs through those resource directories, and it pulls out all of the resources in there and compiles them into this efficient format. It then makes entries into a special class called r.java, and that's a read-only class that you get access to in your application. What that guy does is it has loads and loads of definitions of constants in there, and that's how you pull out these resources to be able to use them in your application. Don't try and edit that, because the moment you do, you'll save, it'll regenerate it, and it'll stamp on any changes you've made. So that's the jurisdiction of the plugin there. Personally, this is my opinion, but I find the XML declarative option is much faster to develop. So, okay, that's UIs. And yeah, we'll go on to the layouts. A little bit of confusing terminology here. I'm not quite sure why this is the case, but views, the term views as they're used in Android is actually what most people think of as controls or components in a lot of systems. So a view will be something like a checkbox or a button or something like that. And so, yeah, most people are used to terming that a control in the VB world or something like that. But the UI is really divided into two different types of thing. There's the views, which are these building blocks, and then there's the layouts, which is the way you put these things together into a nice screen or activity that looks good. So the 5 layouts that are provided right now are the frame layout. And in this case, this is a little bit like CSS divs. You can have these frame layouts that can overlap one another. You can actually completely overlap one with another. That's quite useful if you want to do something like an animated background or a painted background, and then put controls in front of it that you can actually interact with. So that's one possibility there. Linear layout is my favorite because this is the easiest one to understand and use. What it is you either get a column or a row. You can have a vertical or a horizontal linear layout, and it's just a series of cells, one above the other or one to the left and right of the other. And you put your components in that. It can be dynamically resized, and you can nest these things inside of one another. So if you want to get a more sophisticated UI, you start with a vertical linear layout, and you put a bunch of horizontal ones in it, and they can have as many components in as they like. They're nested underneath one another. Nice thing about this is when you've done it, if you take that UI onto a device with a different resolution, it should automatically handle the resizing for you. So it's a nice one to use for that. Relative layout, if anybody's done any grid bag development in Swing, relative layout will seem quite familiar. It takes a series of rules, just like grid bag does. It says things like this button is to the left of this other button, or it's to the top of the container that I'm in, and that kind of thing. And it puts all these rules together and tries to make it a UI. And this is one of the scary classes for me as well, because like I said, I'm not a very good UI guy, and usually my rules don't always add up or make sense, and I end up with kind of random results and things going off the edge of the screen and stuff like that. So I tend to leave that one to the experts. Table layout is just like linear layout, but it's got rows and columns, very much like an HTML table. You can do cell spanning and things like that. And the absolute layout is the one that's very seductive. It means you can specify everything in terms of X, Y, and width and height, and set it, really strongly. The problem with that is, although you're not having to deal with windows that resize, you are probably going to have to deal with devices that have different resolutions or switch between portrait and landscape mode or things like that. And if you use absolute layout, it's not going to do that well. There are places this is useful, though. If you have a dynamic layout with maybe a top right-hand or top left-hand corner that is fixed, then you can always embed absolute layout in there and use it. Okay, layout parameters. Again, this will become clearer when I show you an example later, but the XML file, all of the different tags in the XML file have parameters on them. These are in the Android :naming space, and what they do... Everybody still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. It sounded like it suddenly went quiet up here, that's all. So the parameters, they control different parts of the, or different aspects of the views. So you've got things like the width and the height. And there's this thing called layout weight. And again, if we get time, I'll cover what that does. But it allows you to assign relative importance to components, and that controls how much of the remaining real estate they get. And these are mostly documented pretty well now. There was a time when the documents were very sparse on these parameters. We've worked really hard to try and get all of the parameters documented properly now, which is a great improvement. Okay, so that's the boring UI bit over with. Now we'll get on to the real meat. So these are the architectural components of Android. Android essentially is a component-based development environment, a very strong component-based model, which is something that in the Java world, at least, is kind of new. It's never really caught on. Java and Java developers are all about frameworks, usually. And so it's nice to get a kind of component bias or a component-centric view of the world. So an activity in our Android world is pretty much a component. You can think of it as that. A single activity typically represents one screen in the user interface. There are exceptions to this. They can be faceless. They might not have any kind of screen presence at all. They can also be in a floating window like a dialog or something like that. They can take and return parameters, so you can actually pass in things that you want the activity to have when it starts, and you can get results back from that. That's very useful for a dialog, pre-populating it with information, that kind of thing. And they can be embedded inside of one another as well. Okay, so now we get on to intents and intent filters. So if you think of the activity as the component, then really the intent and the intent filter in particular is kind of the public API for that component. It's what it can do. It's what it can respond to. So an intent, in fact, in the system is a request to get something done. It's like the client end of an RPC call, if you like. But it's not as specific as an RPC call because you don't necessarily know what is going to fulfill your request. You can say, I want to take a picture. That's an intent. You don't know what component is actually going to handle that for you, but you just trust that there is something there to handle it for you. If you want to send an email, again, that's an intent. You say who you want to send it to, and that's done for you. The intent filter is a description on an activity of what that activity or service or the other parts of the system, what it can actually respond to, what services it provides. And the idea is that Android, these things are defined in the Android manifest file. When you install the application onto the device or onto the emulator, the Android operating system registers the intent filters. It knows what your activity can do. And then during runtime, it pairs up those services that it provides with the requests that are coming in from other activities. So this is how the system is kind of hooked together. By the way, if there's any questions at any point along this, please stop me and ask them. Yeah, okay, so I see some hands. There usually are a few questions about this point. So there's, one over there.
So one of the things I might want to do with it is override a particular service. The mailer perhaps on a native handset I don't like. I want to make sure it goes to my mailer. I want to get a certain photo engine or something like that. Could you tell me how how I could make that mapping between an app?
Yeah, sorry, absolutely. The Android environment is actually designed with that in mind. Any of these components, pretty much. I think there's a couple of exceptions, and those exceptions are typically for security reasons. There are some things you don't want people replacing. But for the most part, things like photo pickers, emailers, stuff like that, they have a public API, and as long as you create an activity that conforms to that API and registers itself correctly, it can take over that responsibility for the operating system. So, there's another hand up there.
Does that mean that you can't have multiple things doing the same activity? Like I can't have two email programs use one at one time and another time? So
that's another good question, and one that comes up a lot. The story for that isn't quite complete yet, at least it wasn't the last time I looked. What happens right now is if two or more things are registered that can handle a particular intent or provide the same intent filter, the user gets a choice of which one they want to actually perform that right now. I'm not sure yet whether the system is sophisticated enough to remember that choice each time or whether it lets you do that. I think that's the intent long term. or the intention long term is to say, okay, the user has picked this one before, let them make that the default, that kind of thing. But yeah, if there's more than one that actually is registered to handle that, it gives the user the choice of which one they want to use. So, okay, I guess I'll... Oh, there's one more. This is what I'm here for. So.
I don't know if I should ask all these questions now, but it's related to...
If there's a lot, probably best to wait for the breakout. If something occurs to you as we're going through the slides here, now some of these questions are going to be answered like further on in the slides too. So.
You're not going to cover layout later, right?
I will show some examples of the layout later, so that...
Then I ask one then.
Okay.
So what is the minimum and maximum canvas size? Pixel dimension?
Well, that really depends on... I think that's a very open-ended question because we don't know all of the devices that Android will be running on or anything like that. So
so you don't have like a minimum, because like browser have different types and size, minimum and...
I see. So I see what you're saying. As far as I would probably guess the limits would be, somewhere along the lines of the maximum size of a 32-bit integer or something along those lines. I don't know. I've never pushed the limits that hard, but they're going to be large enough to cope with any device that is likely to come out in the foreseeable
future. Do you have any documentation coming out with related to the minimum, maximum, layout size?
There's quite a bit in there, but if there is a specific hole in that, then it would be great if you could point it out to us, because this is the kind of thing that we do have. We know there's a lot of holes in the docs right now, so we are looking for the things
I would
that
like
people
to
need to know.
fill in the holes if I can.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so moving along. Okay, so intents and intent filters. So far we've explained that activities are these components. They respond to intent requests, and they publish the intents that they can handle as these intent filters. Now, forward navigation in the system, I saw some hands go up for J2ME guys, and J2ME forward navigation is accomplished by kind of changing pages. You give a text redirect, and it follows to a different page, brings up a different screen in your midlet, that kind of thing. In Android, the way you do forward navigation through the system is by creating and resolving intents. So you actually, every time you see a new screen, what you should be doing, you shouldn't be hiding an old screen and creating a new one. That the way this is intended to be used is your activity says, this is what I want to do. It creates the intent, and then it fires that intent, and that makes the new screen come up, or whatever it is that's supposed to handle that come up. Now, sometimes you can be very specific and say, I actually want this particular class to handle this. This is the intent, or this is the activity that I want to start here. Other times you can be very general. You just say, I just want to send an email. And either way, a new screen will come up and do your bidding. So, yeah.
So as far as when Android starts to go out to devices, one of the things kind of related to what you're talking about here with intents and screens, one of the things I find with J2ME is, on every phone my application looks a little different, right? And how that modal is done and things like that is completely different in J2ME. Can you address a little bit how Android's going to handle that?
Yeah, so that's both a good and a bad story. Well, at least I think so anyway. So that the good part of that is if you've got a photo picker or an email client or something like that, some component in the system, then everything that wants to do that operation will use that same component. So the user gets an incredibly consistent, user experience from that. The possible downside to it is, at least right now as well, it's in its infancy. You can do a tremendous amount with the themes and the eye candy in there, and you can actually make applications look very different from one another. And so I think there's going to be some kind of dynamic tension of people who want to make their application just look fabulous, and other people who want to make it look like the rest of the system. And it could be interesting to see where that goes. So.
More what I'm referring to, Dick, is basically on one application it might show radio buttons, another it might show a select option drop down. And I wrote the exact same code and deployed to two different phones, and just a completely different. It allows for single selection, both do, but it's a completely different look to the user.
Yeah, well, and that would be doable if you want. Well, so I guess it depends what you want, really.
I didn't want that.
Right. I guess most people don't. It's a tricky question. I think that with a lot of these things, that the best we can do is kind of take the I guess what the Apple line is, or one of the other companies that provides guidance and human interface design help and things like that to kind of try and make it consistent. But on the other hand, I don't want to stop people from doing something if they think it's going to look just amazing. If they want to create some gorgeous eye candy application that looks different from anything you've seen before, good luck to them, I guess I say. So, we'll see where that goes. Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out the granularity that these things come at. On the one hand, it sounds like, event listeners within the JavaScript environment in Firefox, which you get very, very fine-grained event types, But on the other hand, it sounds more like MIME type to document handler.
Let me. So we'll address some of this later in the presentation. So let me keep going, and hopefully some of that will become clearer. So. Okay.
Well, I did have a question around activities.
Yeah.
And you might end up talking a little bit about this, but so you've mentioned that I launch an activity, and activity is a screen, and my application may have, say, 3 screens.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that because this is a mobile device with very limited memory, you'll have to kind of garbage collect applications.
We're going to cover that in great detail very shortly.
Okay.
So, yeah. This is the one point that I really want to get to. This is what you all have to take away with you from the evening, if I possibly can. So, anyway, so forward navigation is handled through intents. There's 2 ways to start a new intent. There's a start activity, which is kind of a fire and forget. Just do this thing, and I don't want to be detailed, or don't want to be burdened with any of the details. And there's a start sub activity, which is more like a asynchronous XML HTTP kind of request, where upon completion of the sub activity, you'll actually get a callback with the results of that sub-activity, and you'll get notification that it's completed as well. So that can be used as a way to kind of pass control around and get to return results, that kind of thing. Intent receivers, this is where it gets kind of neat. So when you write an intent receiver, when you write an activity that responds to certain intents, by doing this you get a lot of stuff for free. One of them is that you can actually respond to intents that are fired from outside of an Android device. So instead of just dealing with a request from another activity that's running on a phone, you can actually have a server-initiated intent. And this gets to be exciting. So RIM and lots of other companies have put a lot of effort into push email, which is a tremendously successful technology and a very popular one. What this intents model will actually do is let you push just about any kind of event that you want to. So a server could initiate a download of a map to a device, or it could automatically tune you into a online radio station and start playing it. And all of that could be done as push technology using the externally originating intents. Okay, so I'm going to keep moving here because some of the other points that I'm making here will become clearer. Again, though, Android manifest.xml, if anybody's done any enterprise development, Android manifest can kind of be thought of as your deployment descriptor. It says what's in your application. It publishes the endpoints. It makes it register with the system so that it can be used properly. Okay, services. So activities, and this will become very clear very shortly, activities are short-lived things that you can't really rely on to be around for a long time. If you want something that's going to be happening over a period of time, you need to make a service instead. Now, a service is a headless thing. It can't interact directly with the user. It can only send and receive notifications and intent requests. The idea being that if you, for example, wanted to play an MP3, your MP3 chooser, the thing that would let you select the track that you wanted to play, would be an activity. It would communicate with a service in the back end. The service would be the thing that actually played it. That way, the MP3 chooser can shut down, the music continues to play, other activities can interact with that service and control the music, pause it, resume it, that kind of thing. But the key is that any long-term activity like downloading a big file, and playing an MP3, that should be done in a service, not in an activity. Okay, let's move on. Content providers. And this makes more sense if I very quickly touch on the security model that Android has. Android is built on top of a Linux kernel, and it has very, very strong security. In particular, every time you install an application onto the device, a new user is created just to run that application in. All of the data, all of the code, everything that belongs to that application is then put into a directory that's owned by that user and is only read-writable by that user. No other user on the system can actually touch it. In this way, when you deploy an application onto the device, it's on an island. It can't be accessed by anybody or any other activity or application on the system. If you want it to be sharing that kind of thing, you have to tell it what the public endpoints are. And that's not just for activities which respond to intents, but it's also for the data that might be shared in it. The data by default is completely private. If you want to share data, you have to write a content provider in order to share it. And that's a class that lets you provide a simple but very functional row-like view of the data. It lets you do things like query for data, update the data, insert new information, delete it, that kind of thing. So kind of a CRUD access model for it. Content providers, if anybody's worked with REST or REST technology, they're very REST-like or very RESTful. The content or the data is accessible through a URL, which is defined that looks like content : and then you give it what's known as a root authority. The root authority is a class that is registered with the Android system that it knows gets those kind of requests. So when you ask for something from that data, it knows where to route the request. Then the rest of the URL is whatever you want it to be. It's a path that describes the kind of access you want. So you might have contacts / people / by name / and then you give it a name. And you get that path, you can pull it apart, and you can run your query based on that.
So it's registered with the Android data?
Yes, so the question was, it's registered with the Android operating system. So
through the manifest?
Yes, again, content providers are defined in the manifest. And so when you provide that information, the root authority, which is the class that actually handles, or the class that it actually is the content provider, gets registered saying, I can handle these kind of URLs that match this pattern. And when the operating system sees one of those requests come in, it knows exactly where to send that request to. It passes it on to that content provider. So the other part of this kind of little dance is the content providers. They have to take these URLs and not only produce the data for them, but for a particular URL, it has to be able to say what kind of MIME type is going to be returned from that. You can make up the MIME types. You can create vendor-specific ones, anything you like. But it's got to be a unique MIME type, and that helps Android figure out, once it's got the data, what to actually do with it. So you might say an intent might be, I want to view this data. So you hand it the view intent and you hand it the data URL. Android turns around, looks at the data or at the URL, goes to the content provider, and the content provider says, yeah, this is actually an image that I'm giving back to you. And so when you say view that, it then knows to fire up the activity that can view an image, and then it can go and get the data and show it to you. And that can be any kind of MIME type that you want. So it could be audio, it could be just about anything. And that's how Android is able to do these kind of very generic forward-firing intents. You can just say, I want to view something, and you don't have to say what it is. You say, I want to view this data, and Android will work out the rest of the problem for you and fire up the right thing. Okay, lifecycle and bundles. This is the most important thing. Everybody still with me? Everybody still awake? Okay. So this is where it usually gets fairly interesting. People start to realize what's going on here and why they can't rely on activities to be around a long time. Applications run inside of their own processes. The processes are owned by different users. Many activities and services can run in the same process. So you can, within your application, you can define a number of activities. They'll run in the same process. You can have a service that runs in the same process, and so on. But they don't have to be running in the same process. That's an important distinction. Now, processes are started and stopped as needed to run an application's components. So behind the scenes, processes are being started and stopped all the time for you. the thing that is kind of tricky and throws everybody to start with is processes can be killed by Android without you saying so. And this is the most important part of the life cycle and the realization here. So in a traditional kind of desktop environment, when you start too many applications, at some point the machine either bogs down and just starts crawling and you can't do anything else with it. That's actually more typical these days. Or it used to be that you get an error or something would break. Those are kind of the two failure modes. Usually these days, operating systems are strong enough that it just kind of grinds to a halt, and then you say, "Oh, I've got to reboot this damn thing."
If you got Unix, you can break the process. You can just
Yes, there's various ways to get around the problem.
So more optimized garbage collection scheme here.
I'm about to get into that. So now, because this is based on Linux, Linux has a fairly sophisticated virtual memory system built into it. But virtual memory doesn't do us a lot of good in an embedded device because we're already using all the memory. So what the engineers did was they took the virtual memory subroutines and twisted them around a bit, and it became a virtual process management subsystem. So when you start a new activity or something that needs a lot of resources, it actually goes off and looks for processes and resources that it can kill and reclaim. So instead of telling you that you can't run your existing activity or the requested one, it'll go and kill one of the other ones behind the scenes. So this is why it's really important that you understand the life cycle, because this is the point that you realize that you're not actually controlling when applications start or stop. Android is controlling that. You just have to deal with it. So
Can you have comprehensive control of processes and set? Can you have comprehensive or granular control
processes and set priorities for them? Do you have that ability?
So the question about priorities for processes, yeah, that one is still kind of up in the air right now. I don't think that's been finalized.
That's the killer. You got to have that. You got to be able to prioritize things and say, I want this to run ahead of everything else and protect this.
So here's the counterpoint to that. The moment you do that, everybody says, hey, my process is the most important, and puts theirs to the top of the queue. So
no, because this is an app that's on somebody else's mobile device. The user should have control of that.
Okay, so you're saying the user should be able to prioritize it.
And say,
that's actually a very interesting...
and even things like preemptive garbage collection, going in and grabbing the memory, taking control of it and say, I want to devote this much.
So that some of that stuff will be covered in the life cycle. Let's move on to that. But anyway, the important thing to realize here is that you're not necessarily, or you're not at all in control of when applications start or stop. Now, the user experience for Android, for an Android user, should be that they don't ever see an application start or stop at all. Their experience should be that they believe all of the applications are running all of the time and just waiting to be used. There will be times when an application maybe takes a couple of seconds or a little bit longer to respond than it did the last time. And that's when the process has been killed and has to be restarted. But the point is it should come back in exactly the same state that it was in when they left it, even if it's been killed. So this is the application life cycle. Let me get my cursor up here. This is documented in the activity, this is the activity life cycle. This is documented in the activity documentation. Basically, these are the life cycle events that it goes through. So it goes through an onCreate, which is sort of like you could think of it roughly as a main method, but it's actually quite a bit more than that. Beyond start is not heavily used, but that's a message you get after onCreate, where your process is actually being brought to life. OnResume and its partner onPause are two of the more interesting ones. So one activity has focus at any given time in Android. If it has focus, it goes through onResume, and then it's considered to be running. It's actually got an event loop that is happening. It can respond to the user. The moment they switch to another activity, call a sub-activity, get a phone call coming in, anything like that, it goes through the onPause lifecycle event, and it's then considered dormant until onResume is called again. Something comes back to that thing. Now, this is a fairly lightweight operation. You don't have to do a lot here. What you're really seeking to do, and this comes back to the gentleman in the front here, is during an onPause, you should try and release any resources that you don't need when you're not actually running. When you go into a dormant state, if you're a good citizen, you'll drop a bunch of your references, you'll allow them to be garbage collected, that kind of thing. So that's what you really want to be doing there. The other pair is the onFreeze and onCreate. OnFreeze is called when your activity is put into its dormant state. If there's a chance that it could be killed before it's ever restarted, then you'll get an onFreeze event at that point. Now, it's not called all the time because sometimes you're in the same process, and so your process is not going to be killed. You may just go to another activity within the same process. You won't get an onFreeze event all of the time there. But if it switches to another process for any reason, you'll get an onFreeze event. This is where you get handed a persistence bundle in this case, and you want to put your state into the persistence bundle. The idea is you should be able to go through an onFreeze event, come back through the onCreate where the bundle gets handed back to you, and be able to recreate the same state that you were in when you were killed. And the user should have no idea that it's ever happened. That's a well-behaved Android application. The rest of these lifecycle events all have their place, but the four that I've just covered, onCreate, onResume, onFreeze, and onPause, are going to be the ones that you use mostly. So, yeah.
So, just to give a kind of real...
Is this... Yeah, we better get this one on the record.
So just to give a kind of a real-life example. So say I have a chess game that I'm playing with somebody else has an Android phone, and I make a move, and now in the background I have a service running that's just waiting for somebody else to make their move on their Android app, and then they're going to send a message back to my service. My service gets that and says, okay, now I want to display the little notification, chess move has been made. But my activity, I guess, has been killed. Because something happened. What you're saying is that on the onFreeze, I should have stored everything into a bundle about my position on the chessboard, and I'd get those positions back on the onCreate.
And I did say that, and that was actually wrong. You should store your state somehow. The bundle is one way you can store it. That will get handed back to you upon the recreation of your app or of your activity. There are other ways, though. You could use a content provider and a SQL-like database, for example, to store information in. You could store it on a server somewhere. As long as you can get that state back when you come back into your application and restore it so that it looks the same as the user saw it, then you've got a successful Android application. It doesn't matter what mechanism you use to store the state.
Just to continue actually with the chess example, because it's a good one. What if I was playing against my own phone and say I'm doing quite well in the game and the phone is spending 10 seconds to figure out its next move? Now, if I take a phone call during those 10 seconds, is there a way to program the chess application such that it's continuing to calculate the next move in a background thread, or is that not possible because it needs to shut down?
In that situation, something that's let's say it's 60 seconds for the sake of argument. Something that's that long running, that needs to be in a service, and a service it's not subject to the same life cycle restrictions. There are still Android will. I think there are situations where Android can kill a service, but it's not going to happen all the time. It's not the kind of activity life cycle event where things are popping in and out all the time. So in that situation, your calculation engine should be running in a service in the back end. User interface needs to run in an activity. So.
Just to follow up, is there any kind of specific support for threading in Android? Sorry, just to follow up, is there any specific support for threading in Android?
There is the same kind of support for threading that you would find from most Java development environments. You can do it. You're not particularly helped to do it. If you take on that responsibility, then you have to make sure your threads are done correctly, and in particular, the user interface part of it is not thread safe. So, if you have multiple threads, you have to make sure that the same thread talks to the user interface in order to be safe. So, yeah.
And this is a problem we talked with the GWT guys, Joel Webb and those guys. There's somebody needs to write, even if it's an SQLite, a way to calculate what threads are out there, and proactively set almost like a application footprint for each in the application scope for this. Because if you could say, all right, I want to devote this much performance here out of Android to the processor and RAM or flash RAM or whatever you're talking to, whatever you're using, that would allow to solve this problem architecturally. I mean, even if they have to write a zombie application that takes control of the memory explicitly and you set those params for every app and set them in those sandboxes, that's where this problem has to be solved. That's a lot.
Okay, there's Another question back there.
Let's stick to questions.
How are we doing for time?
Can you talk a little bit about what happens when you switch between activities in your own application?
Yeah, in fact, I've got a demo, if we can get to that will actually highlight that fairly well.
Let me just mention my concern, and then maybe you can address it when you talk about that. And the concern is that in order to start an activity or a sub-activity, you essentially are creating a new instance of that activity, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
So is there any way to switch between them without creating new instances?
No and yes. In fact, there's no way for you to control that, but Android actually does a pretty marvelous job of pooling and reusing resources. It's pretty efficient at that. So if you think about it, with one activity that's actually in focus at a time, and with the ability for activities to store state and restore it, you can actually very easily implement a pooling system there. So the idea is that you simply get a bundle back, that same activity that's already running gets given another onCreate with another bundle, and it's told to reuse that information, and so it doesn't have to even restart one. In that case, it can be using the same 3 or 4 activities, getting the state in and out of it, and pooling the activities very efficiently. And in fact, again, the demo that I've written, it kind of demonstrates that. You can go on this forward navigation binge of clicking hundreds and hundreds of links, and you only ever see maybe 4 or 5 actual activities running, and it's just reusing them over and over again. So,
real quick, this flowchart here, is this actually the life cycle of an activity?
This is the life cycle. Oh, yes.
Okay, because I was confused when
that's just mislabeled
about the services. All right.
Yeah. Apologies. Yes, each activity gets this. I can't believe that has been on the slide that long and nobody's noticed it up until this point. That's quite incredible. I've done this talk quite a lot of times and I've never noticed it. So
fix it right now if you want.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of that stuff. We've mentioned that activities are designed to be reused and replaced and replaceable in the system. There are a couple of restrictions in particular. I think there's some extra work you have to go through if you want to replace the home screen for obvious security reasons. But
given that there's obvious memory restrictions, is it safe to say that you're better off kind of with the paradigm that behind every successful application is a offline database?
That's
is there too much?
I'm
does it get complex when there's too many users?
I'm against all generalizations, and if you think about that for a minute, that's kind of. Okay. But I would say that that's a very good model. If you have a massive amount of data, then the chances are you probably want to provide some kind of system where the bulk of it is kept online, and maybe you access it online, or maybe you sync parts of it, bring them down to work on, and then restore them to the server. It's that kind of thing that you probably want to be looking at. However, these are more sophisticated devices than a lot of people have seen up until this point. The Android platform is going to be a bit more capable than the phones of maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So there's actually quite a bit of leeway to do some pretty interesting stuff on there. You can probably store more than you think you can, but you probably shouldn't go and dump your entire enterprise database on there either. That's likely to be a bad idea. So. Okay, let's go through. Okay, so we've covered start activity and start sub-activity. Now, this is where I talk about this being kind of familiar to enterprise people. If anybody's worked with a service-oriented architecture, you might start to realize that this kind of sounds like it might be a kind of service-oriented architecture, and it really is. It's a very lightweight and efficient service-oriented architecture based around a message bus that's run by the Android operating system, and so you request things to happen, and they happen. Okay, bundles. I've mentioned bundles very quickly. Bundles are a way of passing data and also storing things persistently. I'm going very quick now to try and get all through this stuff. Basically, a bundle is a map with a few more type restrictions on it to make sure that you're not trying to store things or pass things that it can't handle. But pretty much, if you can put in a map, or if you're familiar with a map, a bundle is going to be really familiar to you. It's very easy to use, and you can nest bundles inside of bundles, which makes it very easy to restore complex state in a system. Okay, storage and persistence. SQLite is available. Flat files are possible to use, and you write a content provider to kind of wrap the whole thing. I'm going to kind of skip over a lot of this. The resources, we've mentioned the res folder. They're compiled into the APK. There are these things called assets which are available to you, and it's kind of like a file, a read-only file system that you can put more complex files into. The whole thing gets packaged up into an APK file, which is, the emphasis here is on small size, space, and as much pre-compilation as it can do to run more efficiently on a device and have less needs and less size. I've mentioned the security stuff, unique users for applications. There's also extra security features that are related to preventing applications from accessing certain parts of the system unless they declare their intent to. So, for example, you should be protected from downloading a Sudoku application and having it dial 1-900 numbers. That Sudoku application will have to say, I intend to call people, and then there'll be some kind of mechanism in place to say, well, you know, Sudoku shouldn't be really dialing out from my device. Okay, other APIs, very quickly. There's a 2D graphics API that's available to you. It looks quite like the Java 2D API, but there are some differences. 3D graphics, this is OpenGL ES, which is the embedded form of OpenGL. It's approximately where OpenGL 1.3 is on the desktop. And some of the devices that are planned should have some kind of 3D acceleration support in them, which is quite exciting. So I can't wait to see that. Yeah, that's an old picture. Location-based services. There is optional hardware support for GPS. As some of you may know, Google has recently launched a Cell ID service, which is a good alternative if you don't have GPS. It uses the triangulation and signal strength from cell towers to approximate your location. And that's a backup if you don't have GPS on a device. Map support, of course, Google Maps seems to fit in well with a mobile device, doesn't it? Media APIs, there's the ability to record and play back audio and video and take pictures and that kind of thing. And message passing, this is kind of an alternative to SMS, and this is quite exciting. So I mentioned before that you can actually fire intents from off of the device or off of the phone. This is the way that happens. There's a kind of gTalk implementation in there, and a gTalk message can actually have a bundle of data and a specified intent, and it then calls the onCreate method that for that activity with the bundle of data, and so you can fire up anything as though it's actually been initiated from the device. Very very interesting stuff. Yeah. So the question is, can you talk to any XMPP server? That's a question that's been asked a lot. So the intent here is to make it open, and absolutely it will be open. Anyone who wants to send a message or push a message down will be able to do so. We're actually not going to use XMPP now, and the reason for that is a matter of efficiency. We did actually have an implementation that used XML and XMPP. It's quite heavy for data, especially over a limited bandwidth connection and onto a limited resource device. So it will be an API that basically looks exactly like gTalk. It will probably use some kind of binary on-the-wire transfer protocol, but it will be you will be able to send your own messages even if you have to peer a server with the Google servers or something like that. There will be a way to do it. We're not trying to create a walled garden that developers can't access. The whole idea is to get this stuff out there and get people using it. So, yeah.
I saw that the cell triangulation stuff you said was available on every device. I was concerned about whether the carrier would have anything to say about that, whether they expose that data to the device.
So that's a good question, and there's lots and lots of answers for that. I guess you can choose whether you believe them all or not. Google's very keen on not seeing a lot of fragmentation and not seeing a lot of carrier interruption, I guess, of the features that users want to see. And there are better people than I am working on that very problem. So I'm a developer, so I'm just, interested in the developer side of things. I do believe that they are trying to make it that all of these features are available to to all users of this system. I'm not sure what kind of carrots and sticks will be in place to try and make that happen. So
they can use a 911 architecture on there if people allow it.
Okay.
If you file within 60 feet, you can use a 911 architecture on there that they use to find you if you call 911. It's built in all the platforms, any mobile. If it goes across a mobile network in America, it has the functionality that you can expose on all cell phones to find yourself within 60 feet.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to skip the learning more part. The learning more part here, in a nutshell, is go look at the docs and go look at the sample applications that come with the SDK. And that saved you about 4 slides of more detailed stuff. So let's take a look at an actual example now. How am I doing for time?
Well, we had said 8:15, but I mean, since the bulk of the interest is on this topic, I mean, you should take as long as you need.
Okay, well, 15 minutes will be plenty. I think I can probably give a fairly decent demo in 10, and then we'll just go over to questions and stuff like that. So, okay. Oh, thank you. Yes.
From the inside?
I don't know the story behind that one. I just found it. A friend of mine found it on the internet, and I said, "Hey, I want that picture as my background image." So, anyway, so just to give you a little bit of background as to what this application is, I was looking. So, first of all, I'm a big fan of wikis and wiki notepads and desktop wikis. I don't know if you guys are similar like that. I use Voodoo Pad for taking notes on the Mac, and I've got Tomboy on Linux, which does the same kind of stuff. I love these things. It's a great way of organizing your thoughts, and especially when you're scatterbrained like me, it really matches the kind of structure or lack of structure that you actually have. And at the same time, I really wanted a sample application that would prove to people, because there's a lot of doubt about whether these activities are really that efficient, whether this is the way you should be writing applications to turn this much control over to the operating system and use these intents for everything you want to do. So I said, you know what, I'm going to write a wiki and I'm going to make every single link you click in this thing fire an intent and start a new activity, which sounds horribly inefficient, actually works like a charm, and it's exactly the way you're supposed to be developing Android applications. So the idea is every time you click on a new wiki word, it says, hey, I've got this thing. I don't know what it is. It's this data type, and it's got this URL. I'd like to view it. And it fires the intent with the operating system. The operating system, hey, I know who handles that. You do. And turns right back around and calls the activity again. And so this loop is done each time. And it seems like, the conventional wisdom would be, well, you'd put all that functionality into the one application. It would detect the links. It would take care of that. You don't have to at all, and you get a bunch of cool stuff when you don't do this. So let me bring up the emulator and show it to you in practice here. This is my wiki. I can go down. Let's see, have I got... there we go. So I can highlight a word. Wiki words, by the way, camel case. Everybody familiar with wiki words and wikis? Yeah, okay. So you put in a camel case wiki word, it becomes a hot link. You can then click on it, and it takes you to the page. Now, first thing you get for free when you do this is this uses a clever little class called Linkify, which goes looking for certain patterns in text and turns them into clickable links. When you do this, you can have it Linkify a bunch of default stuff as well, and it, for free, gives you the ability to call numbers or the ability to fire up browser application or browser URLs, that kind of thing. So if I click on this now, we can actually bring up the Google homepage, and that was just done. And that was done from no extra work. I get that for free because I'm using the Android system as intended. That started a completely new process, a new activity. It's the browser that's registered for the system. It knew how to handle that URL. So all I said to it was, here's some data. I want to see it. And so I can go back from here. And incidentally, another nice thing about the intents, I glossed over that, is that Android maintains the back stack for you. So when you hit the back button, it does something meaningful. It takes you back to where you were. So yeah, I see a hand up.
So that data, that data wasn't typed?
That data is typed. It's typed in there as a... So if I go to the edit version, just like... Oh, I just activated it again. Just like any kind of wiki, you actually have an edit view and then a display view. So if I put it into the edit mode, then I can go down here and I can actually add a new. So let's add a new. I don't know. Let's say camel case here, and hit confirm. that becomes a wiki word. And so now if I click on that, it takes me to the camel case, which I actually already had an entry for in there, so it linked it up for me. If I create a completely new word, so let's edit this and say my new word is going to be new word. Hit confirm. Then when I select this one, because it doesn't have it already, it drops me straight through into the creation form of this. So anyway, you get the idea there. So what's going on behind the scenes here? Let's have a look at some of the code that's actually used to do this. So the first thing is the all-important manifest file. So if I blow this up to full size. So these are my definitions for this application. This is like my deployment descriptor, if you like. The first one here, this intent, is just, these lines just tell it that this is actually the top level activity for my application, and it should have an entry in the launcher, in the icon launcher, so that I can see it and start it or bring it up as an application. Underneath that, there's an intent filter that says if I get content, if I do the default action on one of these wiki notes, I want this to fire up. And there's a second one here that registers it with this thing called browsable. So if I do a get content for some data that's wiki data, it'll bring up this activity and start it and show what's there. If I click on a link, and that's where the Linkify stuff comes in, that's considered a browsable event. And so the second one is saying if I ask to view something that's come from a browsable category with this data type, this is the activity to start up. And so that's how it finds that.
Is this online?
It will be within days. I'm putting it through. The whole idea is to put this out on Google Code Hosting. It'll be open sourced, and
send us a link, and we'll.
I will. It may. So we're all very busy right now. So it could be some time before it gets through the necessary review layers. But the intent is to have it sooner rather than later. I see a hand up over there. Actually, several hands now. So.
At what point in the development cycle is this verified? These things, I mean, there are many XML descriptors, and they tend to be a nightmare by getting little typing errors in them.
Okay, let's take a look.
Can this be fully compiled so that when you deploy it, you know it's good?
So let's see what happens if I do this and save. Okay, give it a second to rebuild the workspace, and oh, what a disappointment! That wasn't such a good one. Let's change this one instead. Okay, good. Yes, that actually should have picked up that one as well, so that may just not be complete yet. But this actually does, every time you save this file, it does a run through the plugin. It attempts to compile this file, and it will pick up any errors and actually flag the errors here. So I can click on this, and it says there's no resource identifier for attribute names in package Android. So the answer is it's quite early. It picks up these things as early as possible, and it actually tries to help you write them as well. There's some support coming for putting together the flags correctly and coming up with the right attributes, that kind of thing. So, yeah, go ahead. This is what this is for.
What does it mean to have two default intents?
Here, you mean right here? So the category of default means this is a default handler for this particular situation. The more important part of this is the action up here. So this is the requested intent action. So if I did a get content, then this is the default handler for get content if the data that I'm dealing with is a wiki note. This one is a view action instead. So this is saying if I view data as well, then this is what I want to fire up. Again, this is the default for this kind of data, and it's got this extra thing on there which needs to be on there, which says this can be got to through a browsable link as well, which is what makes it work when you click on the link in the wiki notes or in the wiki page. There's one more down here at the bottom. This is just a list of notes. There's a way that you can see recent changes in the system or search results, and so this takes a different kind of thing. Instead of taking an item, it takes a directory, and so this is a collection of things called wiki notes, and in that situation it fires up the wiki notes list class instead and uses that to to display them. And there's two more in here. These have no public API. They can only be accessed. They still have to be declared if you want to use them as activities, but they can only be accessed from within the application. They can't be accessed from outside of it. They have no public API. Okay, so that's that part. Now if I show how this is actually used internally, everybody loves regular expressions, right? So, yeah. So that the core of this is a regular expression that matches a wiki word. That actually looks for that's the right set of combination of pattern matching for finding a wiki word. When it finds that, it puts it together with this thing up here. So what it does is it matches that wiki word, and then it adds the wiki word that it's matched onto the end of this URL. This is our content URL. So it's able to say to this, okay, this is the data that I'm interested in. So in the case of WikiWord, this thing would actually form a URL that had all of this with WikiWord at the end of it. It then fires it, and it goes through to the content provider, which I'll show you really quickly. I'm going to have to... Very difficult working in low resolutions with lots and lots of code. Okay, content provider. It has these pattern matches that are put down the bottom here. And so what it will match is this one that says, this is the root authority, and then it says wiki notes, and then some kind of text after it. And so it says this is the match in this case. This is looking for a note name. And then the rest of this, the content providers are kind of the medium level development stuff. This is intended to be a slightly more advanced example, so I won't go into the whole thing of writing a content provider now, but like I say, the source will be available for it soon. What it does is it, for example, takes the note search, or in fact the note name here, and it says this is an item of WikiNote, and so that's the part that takes the data that we're asking for and turns it into a MIME type, so that Android can then say, here's the activity I need to start for that. And then the rest of it's pretty simple. So WikiNotes, it has a linkify call in here. This is what this is. So the first thing it does is linkify all the things that it knows about. That's all the telephone numbers and email addresses and web addresses and things like that. And the second one is my regular expression and the URL that it maps it to. And so, as a result of all this, when you click on one of these links, it turns the click into a URL. It says to Android, I'm going to show you that bit. It says to Android, on activity result, not that one. Actually, this is handled by Linkify. So this is done internally. You don't even see this part. What this does is turns it into a clickable link, and Linkify then just says, when this is clicked, the behavior is, I want to view this thing browsable. And so you don't even create that intent. That's done for you by the Linkify class. So that part is all handled for you. There are some examples of how you can call other intents, though. I better show you something that actually creates an intent. Yeah. Oh, okay, sorry, I missed that. Go ahead.
I have a question on intents.
Yep.
If I wanted to get an intent, but I did not want to handle it, I wanted to let it pass through the actual handler. Let's just assume I wanted to have a logger that, for debugging purposes, I just want to get a list of all the intents. Is that possible?
Yes. There are various. Excuse me. There's various classes inside of Android that let you query for registered content providers, registered activities, any of these things you can get at. And I've actually written a kind of pretty naff but usable thing that kind of dumps all that information out to the log file. So then you go looking through the logs and you can see all the different content providers that are registered and things like that. So you can get a certain amount of that kind of information. It's no substitute for good documentation, though. Much better to have the docs than trying to reverse engineer some of these content providers that you might find in there. So, okay, so let's actually see this in action. I promised earlier that the stuff is handled efficiently, so let's hope that I was actually true when I said that. So camel case refers to itself. If I click on this a bunch of times, if I select it a bunch of times, then we'll do this. I can actually do it faster by using the keys. So, we're calling this a bunch of times here. And I could back out from this a bunch of times as well. Now let's actually have a look at what's going on in there. So the tools are quite nice. They give you this, it's kind of tough on this resolution, but you can see right here that I can take a look at what is going on in here. Now, how do I get the... Okay, let's see the threads. Okay, so these are the threads that are actually running as part of my wiki notes. And all of those clicks that I just did, and there's still only 3 actual binder threads going on in here right now. This is the 3 activities that are actually doing the work. And that's all there is to it. There's nothing else, just to prove there's no magic here. That's the wiki notes. These are what is running in there. And I could keep doing this a bunch of times. So keep going. Let's sprinkle in some different stuff as well. So new word. And let's put camel case in here so we can swap between them. Confirm. Okay. So now we can swap between these two. So I've dug myself in pretty well there. And you're not seeing loads of new processes, you're not seeing loads of new threads, anything like that. It's reusing the resources very efficiently.
And I assume the TIDs are time IDs and microseconds or milliseconds, whatever. And what's the heap look like during that application?
Okay, so the heap, yes, I'll show you that in a sec. The heap, you can actually, you can connect up a heap analyzer. You only get to see the heap information when you do a garbage collection. And at the moment, it's not very extensive information that you get. So if I force a garbage collection right now, then we can see that we can see basically what's happened to the heap, how many objects were collected, that kind of thing, what's used. I think there are plans to do a much better heap analysis job and actually show you like different classes and where your memory's going, where the vast majority of that resource stuff is being held up. Anyway, so we've established that we're not spawning threads up the wazoo, but I can still come out of this now, and I've got all this backstack and it's remembered all these clicks that I did, and it's coming through to the same activity time and again, and very efficiently using or reusing the same activities. So hopefully this demonstrates that this is the right thing to do. This is an efficient way to use the system, and it's pretty fast in use. I mean, it pulls things in quickly and lets you switch to the edit view very quickly and all that sort of thing. So.
A question that's come up on the list a lot, and maybe you can answer it, maybe you won't. You say it's pretty quick. How about on a real device? I'm sure that internally there are some real devices. What's the relationship between quick, as we see here, running a multi-gigahertz emulated system, I understand, but what's the relationship? Is it quick on a real device?
So the real devices that we have right now, very early ones, they're not particularly powerful, and it does run really, really well on there. In fact, it's in some areas it's actually a little bit better, I would say. In particular, let me give you an example here. Let's add some stuff. If I start typing, there's actually a lag. There's a noticeable lag when you're typing on the emulator. That's really not noticeable on one of the early devices, and they're getting quite a bit more powerful as they come up as well. So
is it because they're using an architecture that's maybe accessing RAM on a RAM chip or flash memory architecture?
I think mostly it's because this is just an emulator and not a particularly optimized one at that. So the speeds are probably roughly equivalent, but the emulator, the important thing is that it runs fast enough to let you develop your applications.
Are there any public partners you can name that people can access buy devices from them?
There are no devices available yet. So,
not even development partners?
Not even developer ones. But you can easily find out who's in the Open Handset Alliance and figure out the rest from there.
So what I'm hearing is that the emulator, whether it's intentional or not intentional, runs slow enough that if you design something here, it's going to do better on the real thing.
I would say, well, I'm not going to be backed into that particular corner, but yeah, representative-wise, there are some neat things I'll show you very quickly along those lines. In particular, when you actually do run. So let's get the run dialog up. If I do a open debug dialog, as well as kind of not giving you a runaway fast system to run on, there are things that you can do to, for example, to simulate slow network speeds. So it'll actually throttle the network speed back to GPRS speeds so that you don't get this false sense of security for having gigabit Ethernet coming into your laptop and then suddenly find that syncing takes 3 hours when you write your application, that kind of thing. So you can simulate the different speeds and that kind of thing. You can simulate some latency values and that, all that sort of thing. So.
You talked a little bit in one of the earlier slides about access to the hardware, to Wi-Fi, things like that.
Oh, yeah. I skipped over that slide because it's still in there, but it's one of those things that we just don't have a lot to tell people just yet.
Okay, so we wait for more news on that front?
In the next version, which is not too far away, we are going to have some support for kind of a JNI-like ability to call native libraries, which will enable people to do some of this stuff for themselves, and also probably some better hardware support for things like the Wi-Fi and stuff like that as well.
Okay, so right now the emulator just is completely sandboxed.
No, the emulator is very representative of what's running. You shouldn't get the idea that the emulator is.
But with regards to direct hardware access, things like that.
So, yeah, in that situation, yes, they would have to be emulated. And so, I see what you're saying. But the point is that all of the native libraries that would be running on a device, that native code is actually running on the emulator. You're not in any kind of simulation environment. You have a full stack from the kernel level up. Stuff that runs on here, it's really, really going to run on an eventual device, and in fact, even if devices are available to developers, everyone uses the emulator because it's faster to develop on here. It's just a faster way to go. So there's more hands. We're keeping you fit. We're keeping you fit, Van.
Thank you. This might be a silly question, but is there a way in your emulator to switch from portrait to landscape mode?
That isn't a silly question at all, and it's also, at least at the moment, not possible. But it is something that we hope to have before too long, I think. You can change. Yeah, you can change. You can select resolution when you start it, but what we lack at the moment is the ability to simulate a rotate event and say. Actually test that your application does the right thing and resizes correctly and that kind of thing. The best you can do for now is start your application in portrait and then shut down the emulator and then change it to landscape mode and start it again and make sure it looks right. And there's quite a bit more to being able to cope with a rotate event than that in real life. So.
Does the same answer apply to gestures like zooming with the previous?
So the question is about, does the same apply to gestures with zooming? Touch support is being, or touch simulation, if you like, is being added to the emulator. You can already, even in the M3 SDK, which is the one that's out there right now, some of the touch support was actually there. Some buttons could be clicked, other ones weren't. The stuff we're working on now is a lot closer to having full touch support. As far as gestures go, that's a whole other issue which I'm not qualified to answer. There's legal parts to that. I'm sure some of you are probably aware that multi-touch is one of those things that another very popular phone right now has, and I'm not quite sure what the legal story is. Nor do I really want to know, to be honest. I'm quite happy living in my happy developer world and programming things and not worrying about the legalities and that kind of thing. So yeah.
Is this? I thought I had read that this wasn't a certified Java implementation. That there was slight differences.
That is absolutely correct. The Dalvik, so there is no Java VM running in this system. What the VM is, it's called Dalvik. It's called Dalvik because the engineer who wrote it likes Iceland and decided that he would name it after his favourite town in Iceland. And I think there's nothing more to it than that. But Dalvik, what it actually does is it's kind of a combination of a VM, very lightweight and efficient VM for running on embedded devices, and also a set of tools that does a second stage of compilation. So it takes Java class files and compiles that. It takes them further into the no man's land between kind of managed and native. It still runs on a VM, but it's been further compiled to be more efficient and run using less resources and faster on modest hardware without the need for a just-in-time compiler. So, I think that... Can we come back to you after? Yep, okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you see any midlet support, any J2ME?
That's another good question. I think that there's I have to be careful when I say not because of any embargo on it, but I'm just not sure how up-to-date my information is. During the early days of the OHA announcement, there was a company that was meant to be providing that environment as an option for anybody who wanted it. I just don't know what the state of that is right now. We're very focused on providing the Android development environment, and the thing is, at the end of the day, this is going to be open source. It's Java. If people want J2ME on there, it will of course happen. Somebody will put it on there. So there's absolutely no reason why that wouldn't be the case. But I think you'll agree that the architectural differences and the technological differences are big enough that it would be difficult to run the two in a kind of mixed mode environment. It's a very different approach to mobile development. So, yeah.
So the question about switching from landscape to portrait again.
Yep.
When that happens, does your layout manager get rerun, or does the whole application gets thrown out and you have another one, or how does that? Since you can't emulate that, what actually is going to happen?
So I think you just said the magic words there. Since you can't emulate that, I'm actually not too sure right now because it's not something I'm able to develop or test personally. My understanding is that you make an entry in the Android manifest that says my application is one that can cope with being rotated. So don't kill me. Give me a rotation event when that happens. Beyond that, I don't want to say any more because it will almost certainly be wrong, and I'd rather give out no information than wrong information. But we're not quite at that stage yet to cope with the rotate stuff. So,
would this be a good breaking point before we go to breakout, or is there something else you really wanted to cover?
There was a guy who had a second part of the question over there, and after
the last question, and then we'll
after that, I'll be around for a while. If anybody has any more questions, I'm happy to answer them. So,
I just wanted to follow up on the. Java-like, but not quite Java. Is there any intent to document the places where they're different? And what I'm thinking of is there might be some contracts that you would be used to in a JVM. I saw the static initializer code, and I thought to myself, well, gee, maybe the whole class gets garbage collected, and that gets, that static initializer gets run twice or something weird like that that you wouldn't expect. And can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I can a little bit. I again would rather give out no information than wrong information. So, but I'll certainly explain what I can about that. The Dalvik stuff is meant to run very, very similarly to the Java VM. We're not looking to make it different in any way. One of the things that we're very keen on doing, at least at this point in the process, is develop fast rather than getting stuck in kind of the standards and compliance world and getting hung up in that. I'm sure that stage will come eventually. Right now, it's more about getting the thing, working and working well, and taking it from there. But yeah, the questions you raise are definitely good issues. I think the aim would be to make it work as much like the Java VM as possible. It's just that, at this point, certification and all that kind of thing, it's heavy and would slow us down. So,
raffle time.
Okay, raffle time. I guess I'll step back.
So,
thank you, everyone.
While he's setting it up, I don't know if those of you that are familiar with JavaFX, but there's one person who's written a book, Jim Weaver, about JavaFX, and we've been talking with him, and we said, it'd be really nice to have an example using it to for our raffles. So he put together this basically your traditional spinner wheel, put the names on it, spin it, name come up. And it's all done in Java with JavaFX. So, and all your names are in there. Of course. Oh, yes, of course.
So I guess we'll just, is this on? Yeah. So we'll just, we'll spin for the first name and then just come up and you can select among the stuff that we have up here.
And this is also, this is also our official bio break period. And then what we'll do is Dick is going to stay around and, oh, cool. There in a row. It's near
Number
here.
one. Is he here?
Oh.
She? Yeah. Not quite as good looking, but yeah. So this is all Java FX, so it's a tweening. It's a kind of a Java competitor to like Adobe Flash, that kind of stuff.
Adobe Flex.
Yeah, Flex. Well, more like Flash. And basically you write a very, come on up and pick something. But it's very easy to write this code.
Start it going again.
Nope.
Takes a while to run, or unless you can make it go faster.
So I'll submit that to Jim Weaver. So Jim Weaver wrote the book on Java FX, and basically what he wants to do is to have this on his blog every week and kind of post an enhancement. And the enhancements would come from suggestions either from me or from the user group. So if you have suggestions like that, we'll push them. So he wants to keep it really easy at the beginning, and then basically, so people can follow this as a tutorial on how to learn Java FX.
He said he wasn't going to be here, so
he's not going to be here? Van knows. Yeah, that's another. That's we've
this
already got
is version 0.01. Yeah, we're gonna we'll refine it over time.
This is maybe like 100 lines of FX script. Very very simple.
Amen to Anthony.
And maybe less than that.
All right, we have a winner. So while this is going on, I think I'll just talk because I like to talk. No. So we are going to take a bio break. In fact, if you aren't really desiring to get the swag, you could take your bio break right now. When we come back, let's say at 8:45, we still have until 9:30. So we have 45 minutes. What I'm going to suggest, I know most people are interested in Android, but I would like to meet the other people that do mapping work with Google technology. So I'm going to be in back. And even if we just find out tonight what kind of things you do with maps, and similarly for other topics like open social, might be just an opportunity this week to just meet the other people that have the similar interests to you. So I encourage you, if you're not an Android developer or planning to be an Android developer, go ahead to the back and meet other people that we'll try and be discreet so we don't disrupt the additional Q&A, but that's what I recommend. Gelb Scott.
Scott Gelb.
Or Scott Gelb, sorry.
I did him reverse.
You didn't reverse him, okay.
I was working while I did this.
Is Scott here? So can we do this on Android? How can we do this in the Android emulator?
Stay here. Come on up.
Going to be about Java FX?
This is all Google technologies, but we can have a Java FX breakout.
What was the question?
She wanted to know if there's a Java FX breakout. Probably not today.
Yeah,
but next, what's the date of our meeting? Is it the 16th?
19th. Yeah.
So the 19th we'll have a Terracotta meeting for the Java user group. So we can do an FX breakout then.
Okay.
Yep. Jack.
I'm going to take a break myself, so.
Cool.
I'll give you this.
Yeah. Here it comes.
Some of these are women's as well.
Okay. Anyone else? So has anybody done any FX stuff before? FX script, a little bit? Yeah. So it's really hard to figure out how to download the emulator and stuff. And I couldn't find that information anywhere on Sun's site. But if you go to Jim Weaver's blog, there's all the information there. So it makes it very easy. I'd never done it, and within maybe 10 minutes, I had it up and running. We'll link it off our site.